The yard was quiet that morning. Not the kind of quiet you notice right away, the kind that settles over you slowly like fog. A soft light filtered through the trees. Somewhere nearby a bird called once, then stopped, and then he stepped forward, slowly, arms open at his sides. Not reaching, not grabbing, just open, the way you'd approach something fragile, something that had been broken before and remembered it. In front of him stood a Pallas cat. She wasn't large. Pallas cats rarely are. Compact, thick-furred, with flat, wide faces that make them look almost ancient, like something that survived an era the rest of the world forgot. Her coat was pale gray and gold in the morning light, her amber eyes fixed forward. But she wasn't standing the way a wild cat stands. Behind her, a small wheeled support device held her hindquarters steady. Her back legs, still, unresponsive, rested in the frame, and yet somehow she held herself with a quiet dignity that made the device feel almost invisible. She wasn't running, she wasn't hiding, she was just watching him, unblinking, and for a moment neither of them moved. There's something about the way a wild animal looks at you when it isn't afraid. It's not the look a dog gives you, eager, searching for cues. It's slower than that, more careful, like they're reading something in you that you didn't know was written on your face. She was reading him now. Her ears, wide, tipped with faint dark fur, stayed forward, alert but not alarmed. Her tail was low, still, chest rising and falling in slow, measured breaths. He didn't speak, he just knelt down, one knee to the ground, patient, and the thought that crossed his face in that moment, if you'd been standing close enough to see it, wasn't excitement, it wasn't relief, it was a question: does she know me? Because the thing about time is that it changes everything, including what something remembers. He'd been away for years, not by choice, but the way life pulls people in directions they didn't plan for. And she had been here, in this protected space, safe and cared for, but far from him, living her days in the only way she knew how now, without him. He watched her hold that stillness, and part of him braced for the answer he didn't want, that she would look at him the way she looked at any stranger, with flat, unreadable caution, that the years had simply dissolved whatever they'd once shared into nothing. Because animals aren't sentimental, they don't keep calendars, they don't lie awake thinking about the past, and yet, she hadn't moved away. Most wild cats, even ones raised in captivity, will break eye contact, shift their weight, find a reason to create distance. It's not aggression, it's just self-preservation, written deep in the body. She wasn't doing any of that. She was still watching him, still, breathing, present. The caretaker standing nearby said nothing. She'd seen enough of these moments to know when to stay back, when the space between two living things needs to be left alone. The man's hand rested on his knee, not extended. He wasn't asking her to come, he was just being there, occupying the same air, letting whatever might happen, happen. A breeze moved through the yard. Her fur shifted slightly. She blinked, slow, long, then returned her gaze to him, and something about that single blink stopped him. He exhaled quietly, looked down for just a second, then back at her. There are moments in life that arrive without announcement. No music, no warning. They just settle over you, and you realize that what you're witnessing is something you're going to carry for a long, long time. This was becoming one of those moments. But standing there in that quiet yard, watching her hold his gaze with those ancient amber eyes, his mind wasn't in the present, it was somewhere else entirely. A road, cold air, years ago, the sound of wind across rough terrain, and a small motionless shape on the ground, so still that for a moment he'd thought he was already too late. Her back legs hadn't moved then either, but back then it wasn't because of a support device, it was because she had nothing left. The road had no name on any map he knew. It cut through a stretch of open country the way old roads do, not built for speed but worn down by years of use, by boots and wheels and weather, the kind of place where the land feels wider than it should, and the sky sits lower than you remember. He'd driven it dozens of times, but that morning felt different before he even knew why. The cold came first, the kind that doesn't announce itself. It just presses against the windows and settles into the cab of the truck, even with the heater running. His breath fogged slightly when he exhaled. Outside, the grass along the roadside was pale and stiff with frost. He almost didn't stop. That's the part he'd return to, later, in quiet moments, when the mind replays things not because you want it to, but because it needs to settle something. He almost didn't stop. His eyes caught the shape at the edge of the road, something low to the ground, too still, and for a half-second his foot stayed on the accelerator. Then it didn't. He pulled over slowly, left the engine running, stepped out into the cold, and that's when he saw her. She was small, smaller than he expected. Pallas cats have a way of looking larger in photographs, all that thick, dense fur giving them a heaviness they don't quite own in person. But lying there at the edge of the frost-stiffened grass, she looked fragile in a way that hit him somewhere behind the chest. She wasn't moving, not running, not hissing, not doing any of the things a wild cat does when something large approaches. She was just lying there, on her side, eyes half open, breathing, barely. Her back legs were wrong. He could see it from where he stood, still a few feet away. The angle, the stillness, the way the rest of her body seemed to be trying to compensate, front legs making small, exhausted movements, like she'd already spent everything she had trying to get up and had simply run out. He stood still for a moment, not frozen, thinking, because the decision in front of him wasn't simple and he knew it. Wild animals don't want to be touched. That's not cruelty, it's just truth. Every instinct in a Pallas cat is calibrated toward one thing: survival. And survival, for most of their lives, means staying away from anything that walks on two legs. Getting close to her meant stress. Stress in an animal already this compromised could be the thing that ended her. But leaving her there meant something else entirely. He looked down the road in both directions, empty. The wind moved through the grass in slow waves. Somewhere far off, a hawk turned lazy circles against the white sky. There was no one else coming. There was no other option that he could live with. He went back to the truck. He moved slowly. Everything slowly. He grabbed what he had: a worn canvas jacket, an old blanket from behind the seat, a pair of thick gloves. Not ideal, not a rescue kit, just what a man has in a truck on a cold morning when life doesn't give him time to prepare. He approached her the way you approach something you don't want to frighten. Not directly, not fast, but at an angle. Body low, eyes averted slightly, talking in a low, even voice. Nothing specific, just sound, just presence. She watched him come. Her eyes tracked him, wide and amber, without the energy to do anything about it. He knelt beside her. Up close he could see the full extent of it, the hind legs completely unresponsive, the shallow, effortful breathing, a faint tremor that moved through her body every few seconds, not from cold alone. Gently, carefully, he wrapped the jacket around her. She flinched once, a single sharp contraction of her front legs, and then went still again. He lifted her. She didn't fight him. And somehow, that was the hardest part. The drive to the nearest facility felt longer than it was. He kept one hand on the wheel and one eye on the blanket-wrapped shape on the passenger seat, watching for movement, watching for breathing, talking, still, low and even, the same way he'd approached her on the road. She made no sound. He made himself focus on the road. The veterinarian who met him didn't sugarcoat it. Spinal trauma, possibly from a vehicle impact, possibly a fall. Pallas cats sometimes travel across rough rock terrain, and the margins between safe and catastrophic are narrow. There was inflammation, nerve involvement. The back legs showed no response to stimulus. "We'll do what we can," she said. "But I want you to be prepared." He nodded. He asked what prepared meant. She looked at him steadily. "It means this may be the best she gets." The first week was the hardest. Not because of anything dramatic, no single crisis moment, no clear turning point. Just the slow, grinding weight of watching something small and wild endure something it didn't understand. She wouldn't eat the first 2 days. Wide eyes tracking every movement in the room, body pressed against the back wall of the enclosure, as far from everything human as she could manage. The tremors came and went. Her breathing stabilized, then dipped, then steadied again. He came every day. He didn't try to interact, didn't push, just sat nearby, outside the enclosure, quiet, reading sometimes just present. The staff thought it was unusual. He thought it was the least he could do. By the end of the second week, she'd eaten, small amounts, cautious, but she'd eaten. The veterinarian called it a good sign and meant it carefully. Not as a promise, but as a fact. She was still here. She was taking in food. Her body was trying. Whether her legs would ever follow, that was still an open question. One that hung over every morning he drove out to check on her. One that the numbers and the scans and the careful, honest faces of the medical team couldn't yet answer. She was surviving. But survival, he was beginning to understand, was only the beginning of the question. The real question, the one that would take months to answer, was what surviving was going to look like, and whether she would ever move through the world again on her own terms. The scans from that third week told them something they hadn't wanted to confirm. The damage was permanent. There is a particular kind of grief that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with tears or sharp moments of loss. It comes quietly, in the middle of ordinary things. While you're pouring a cup of coffee, while you're driving a familiar road, it settles over you like weather. Not a storm, just a long gray sky that you learn to move through because there's no other choice. That's what the weeks after the diagnosis felt like. Not despair. Just the slow, steady work of adjusting to a truth that wasn't going to change. Her back legs were not coming back. The inflammation had receded. The scans were clear. The veterinary team had done everything that could be done, and what remained was simply this. A young Pallas cat with a still, unresponsive lower body and a pair of amber eyes that watched the world with the same quiet intensity they always had. She was alive. She was aware. She just couldn't move the way nature had built her to move. And the question that replaced the first one, will she survive, was now something harder, in some ways, to sit with. What kind of life can she have? The rehabilitation specialist came in the 4th month. She was a quiet woman, practical in the way that people are when they've spent years solving problems that other people have already given up on. She reviewed the scans, watched the cat move, or try to, across the enclosure floor with her front legs doing all the work, hindquarters dragging slightly behind. She didn't wince, she just watched. Then she said, "I think we can build her something." She didn't mean a cage. She didn't mean a pen. She meant mobility. The device took 3 weeks to design and fit properly. That part is easy to say in a single sentence. It was not easy in practice. The first version didn't sit right. Too much pressure at the hip, causing her to freeze rather than move. She'd stand in it, motionless, every muscle tense, ears flat. Not in pain, the team believed, but deeply uncomfortable, confused by the sensation of something mechanical touching her body, holding her up in a way that didn't match anything her instincts recognized. They adjusted. The second version was better. She'd tolerate it for short periods, 5 minutes, then 10, before the tension in her shoulders told them it was enough for the day. He was there for most of the fittings, sitting to the side, quiet, letting the specialists work, not interfering, not inserting himself into the process, but present, a familiar shape in the room, a constant in the shifting environment of handling and adjustment and slow, patient repetition. She began to notice, not dramatically, no sudden turn of the head, no obvious recognition. Just a subtle thing, the way her eyes would find him first when the enclosure door opened, the way her breathing stayed slightly slower when he was in the room versus when he wasn't. The rehabilitation specialist noticed it too. She didn't say anything about it directly. Just smiled once when she thought he wasn't looking. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday. Nothing special about the day. Overcast, cool, the facility quiet in the way it got mid-morning when the early rounds were done and the afternoon hadn't started yet. He'd arrived with coffee he didn't end up drinking, sat in his usual spot. She was fitted into the support device by one of the technicians, placed gently on the floor of the exercise area. The technician stepped back, and then she moved, not much, 3 steps, maybe 4. The front legs reaching forward, the wheeled support tracking behind, her whole body working in this new awkward collaboration between muscle and machine. But she moved. He didn't say anything. He pressed his lips together and looked at the middle distance for a moment, the way people do when they're trying to hold something in, and then he looked back at her. She had stopped. She was looking at him. 4 steps, that was all. But she had done it herself. The months that followed were slow and uneven, the way real progress always is. Some days she covered the length of the exercise area twice. Some days she tolerated the device for 20 minutes, then refused it entirely, sitting with her back turned, communicating in the plainest terms available to her that she was done for the day. He learned to read those signals. He learned a lot of things in those months. The way her ears positioned themselves when she was calm versus merely tolerating, the difference between the slow blink that meant comfort and the long stare that meant don't, the specific quality of silence she produced when she was content, a kind of settled stillness, entirely different from the frozen watchfulness of stress. She was not domesticated. That was never the goal, and he never pretended otherwise. But she was, in the careful, limited, honest way that exists between a wild animal and a human who has learned to respect those limits, bonded to him, aware of him, choosing in small and specific ways to be near him. That was enough, more than enough. The decision to move her to a permanent protected facility came in the early fall. It was the right call. Everyone involved knew it. She needed space, real space, not a rehabilitation enclosure, and stability, and the kind of consistent long-term care that a single person with a single life that moved and changed and made demands couldn't reliably provide forever. He agreed with the decision. He helped with the transition, and on the last morning before the transport, he sat with her one final time in the exercise area. She was in her support device, moving slowly along the far wall, pausing to investigate something near the baseboard with the focused, unhurried attention that cats give to things that interest them. She didn't look at him when he sat down, but after a few minutes she turned, wheeled herself, still awkward, still her own particular way of moving, across the floor toward him, stopped a few feet away, looked at him. He didn't reach out. She stood there for a long moment, then she turned back to the wall and continued her investigation. He stayed until the transport team arrived. Years passed the way years do, quietly, gradually, with the slow accumulation of days that don't feel significant individually but that add up, eventually, to something you have to reckon with. He thought about her sometimes, got occasional updates through the facility. She was stable, adjusting well, eating reliably. The staff there were good people. She was safe. It was enough to know, until the morning his phone rang, and the voice on the other end said words he hadn't let himself expect. "She's still here. We thought you might want to come see her." He was quiet for a moment. Outside his window, the light was the same soft gray it always was in early morning. "Yes," he said, "I'll come." And somewhere in the space between that answer and the drive that followed, something in him that had been held carefully in place for a very long time began, quietly, to loosen. Thonbomlandados. The drive took most of the morning. He didn't mind. There's a particular quality to a long drive when you're moving towards something you've waited years for. It doesn't feel slow, exactly. It feels necessary, like the miles themselves are part of the process, like arriving too quickly would somehow skip something important. He watched the landscape change outside the window, open country giving way to tree lines opening back into fields. The sky was pale and wide, the kind of sky that makes everything beneath it feel both small and significant at the same time. He didn't play music, just drove, and tried not to build too much out of what was waiting at the end of the road. That was the thing he kept returning to on the drive. Expectation. He'd learned in the years since her transfer how to hold hope loosely, how to want something without gripping it so tightly that the wanting became its own kind of damage. She was a wild animal. She had her own interior life, her own rhythms, her own relationship to memory and time that operated entirely outside of human sentiment. She might not know him. She almost certainly had no concept of years apart or reunion or any of the other shapes his mind kept trying to press onto the moment. And if she looked at him the way she'd look at any stranger, with that calm, flat, measuring gaze, he needed to be ready for that. He told himself he was ready for that. He wasn't entirely sure he believed it. The facility sat at the end of a gravel road bordered by low trees, quiet, well kept, the kind of place that feels serious without feeling institutional, where the people who work there have chosen this, specifically, and it shows in the details, in the way the enclosures were built with space and thought, in the way the staff moved, unhurried, deliberate. A woman met him at the entrance. She'd been here longer than most, she told him. She knew the cat well. "She's had a good few years," she said as they walked. "She's healthy, strong, considering. The mobility device has been refined twice since you last saw her. She handles it well now, moves with more confidence." He nodded, listening. "She's not social," the woman continued. "Not with most people. She tolerates the staff who work with her regularly, but she's never been what you'd call open. She paused. "We were curious," she said carefully, "how she'd respond to you." He didn't answer that. They rounded a low building, and the yard opened up in front of them. She was already there. Standing near the center of the space, in the morning light, fitted into the support device he recognized but didn't, refined, as the woman had said, adjusted over years into something that fit her more naturally now. The frame sat closer to her body. She moved in it differently than she had in those early uncertain sessions, with a kind of ownership, like it had simply become part of how she existed in the world. She was looking toward the tree line when they came around the corner. Then she turned and found him. He stopped walking. Everything in him went still. Across the yard she held his gaze with those amber eyes, wide, flat-faced, ancient-looking in the particular way of her species, the frost-pale fur catching the soft morning light. Neither of them moved. The woman beside him stayed back without being asked. Seconds passed. He took one slow step forward. She didn't retreat. Her ears stayed forward, not pinned back, not angled away, forward, attending. Her tail was low and still. Her breathing, from where he stood, appeared calm. The kind of calm that isn't the absence of alertness, but something that exists alongside it. He took another step. She watched him come. He stopped about 10 feet away and lowered himself, slowly, one knee to the ground, making himself smaller, less vertical, less like a threat. His hands rested open on his thigh. He didn't speak. He didn't reach. He just stayed there. The yard was very quiet. Somewhere beyond the tree line, a bird moved through branches. The light shifted slightly as a thin cloud crossed the sun. She took a step toward him. Just one. The wheeled support tracked behind her, the faint sound of it on the ground almost inaudible. She stopped, looked at him with that long, unreadable gaze. Then something changed. Not dramatically. Not the way it happens in films where the music swells and the moment is announced to you before you've even had time to feel it. This was smaller than that. This was a single slow blink, the kind that in the language of cats carries more weight than most people realize. She blinked at him. Long, slow, deliberate, and then she took another step. She closed half the distance between them before she stopped again, close enough now that he could see the specific amber of her eyes, not uniform but layered, like light through shallow water, close enough to hear the soft sound of her breathing. She was looking at his face, not at his hands, not at the space around him, at his face. He felt something shift in his chest. The thing he'd been holding carefully in place for the entire drive, for the entire years of careful distance, for every moment of wanting without gripping, it moved, just slightly, just enough. He lowered his hand toward the ground, palm open, not reaching, not asking, just there. She looked at it. Her nostrils moved almost imperceptibly, reading him, the way animals read the world, not with memory the way humans carry it, not with narrative or story or the weight of shared history consciously recalled, but with something older and more direct than any of that, with the body's own knowing, with what the cells remember when the mind cannot. She took one final step and stopped just within reach. She didn't press against his hand. She didn't close her eyes or lean in or do any of the things a domesticated animal might do in a moment of reunion. She was, and would always be, what she was, a wild thing that had learned, in a very limited and specific way, to allow one human into the perimeter of her world. But she stayed. That was the thing. She stayed. Inches from his open hand, in the quiet morning yard, with the light moving slowly across the grass and the sound of the world continuing around them, she simply remained, present, still, not afraid. He didn't move for a long time. He wasn't sure how long. It didn't seem important to track. The woman standing back near the building said afterward that it had been nearly 4 minutes, that in all the time she'd worked there, she had never seen the cat hold that proximity with anyone outside the daily care staff. He didn't know that yet. In the moment, he only knew what the moment contained, which was this: a yard, and light, and a small wild creature that had survived more than most things survive, who had rebuilt her relationship to movement and to trust and to the world entirely, and who was now choosing in the quiet, unhurried way that wild things choose to be near him. He finally exhaled. Long, slow. She didn't flinch. He lowered his gaze for just a moment, not looking away, just releasing the intensity of the eye contact the way you do when you want something to breathe. and in that pause something settled. Not resolution exactly. Not the clean closure of a finished chapter. More like the feeling of something being returned that you'd stopped expecting to see again, something you'd learned to live without, and then suddenly didn't have to anymore. He looked back at her. She was still there, still watching, still present. He drove home late that afternoon. The same long road, the same wide sky, different now in the way that landscapes are different after something in you has changed. Not the road, you. He didn't try to put words to it on the drive. Some things resist language for a while. They need to be carried first, felt first, before they're ready to become sentences. But somewhere on that long drive home, with the light going golden and low across the fields, a thought arrived and stayed. He'd spent years wondering if she remembered him. He understood now that he'd been asking the wrong question. Memory for a wild animal isn't a story. It isn't a name or a face or a timeline of shared events. It lives somewhere older than all of that, in the body, in the nervous system, in the specific quality of calm that one particular presence produces and no other does. She hadn't remembered him the way he'd hoped she might. She'd remembered him the way that mattered. And in that silent moment, I realized something I'll never forget. Some bonds don't need words. They don't need to be explained or proven or understood. They just need time, and the quiet courage to show up, again and again, without any guarantee of what you'll find when you do. She taught me that, not with anything she said, but with the simple, extraordinary fact of staying,